Hi, I'm Pat McGrew, and I am here to talk about PDF Evolved. And so we're going to start with a little bit of a presentation, and we're going to roll into a really interesting interview that I did with David Sweetnam from the Keypoint Intelligence Lab. But let's get started with PDF Evolved, because there are a lot of things you may not know about PDF, and that is where we're going to start. So let's get started with the show. So again, I'm Pat McGrew from McGrewGroup, and what we're going to talk about today is PDF and where it came from. Now, it's very likely that you've been in the industry maybe as long as I have, and you've remembered the good old days when there wasn't PDF. We printed line data, we printed metacode, we printed AFP, we printed PCL. There were a lot of things that we printed, and that opened up the need for things like data stream transforms, which probably many of you are familiar with. Back in 1993, as the result of a project that was going on inside of Adobe to meet some requirements from some of their customers, from some of their larger clients, there was a project around trying to take PostScript, which was the lingua franca of the ad agency world, and make it possible to do display PostScript. And the reasoning was that it would make it possible to do soft copies of proofs. And there was a lot of value in that. Proofs are very expensive to produce. They're expensive to send. There were a lot of reasons that they wanted something that looked like display PostScript. But PostScript's a programming language. It's really very complex. So the initial version of the response to we want to be able to see it on a screen was something that was part of Project Camelot, and that was run by John Warnock, and the whole team at Adobe at some point or another was involved in it. But what it did is it started to lay the groundwork for what we know as PDF today. An awful lot of what is inside PDF today has evolved over the last 20 years, has been the big growth spurt for PDF. But in the very beginning, the goal was just to get something onto a screen that was an identical approximation of what would have printed on a PostScript printer. So January 1993, Camelot project is unveiled at the Windows and OS 2 conference. For those of you not old enough to remember OS 2, OS 2 was going to be the next big PC operating system. It was also created by Microsoft for IBM, and it had a lot more intuitive features to it. It had a lot more drag and drop interface. It was a lot more WYSIWYG in a lot of ways. What you see is what you get. But OS 2 sort of wandered off and got merged into various forms of Unix and grew from there. But the PDF that was introduced was really, it was an idea, right, in 1993. But by 1994, a very interesting thing happened. They introduced a free reader, a free Acrobat Reader. And why that was such an important thing for our industry is that all of a sudden, here was this free tool that anybody could download, which meant that if you were an insurance company or a bank or someone who needed to send invoices out, all of a sudden, you didn't have to worry about buying or licensing viewers for the different data streams, the metacode data streams, the AFP data streams that were more regularly found in our industry. Now, if you could get your transactional data into a PDF format, there was this free reader that anybody could download. Well, that was pretty cool. So a lot of us early in the industry started to look at PDF as something that would be really valuable for all of us. And so the trick was that PDF really wasn't ready for prime time when it came to things like bills and statements. It really didn't have all the coding in it that would make it possible to really ensure that what came out of the policy management system, the statement generation systems, a lot of homegrown code would display correctly. So there were some things that had to get added into PDF. And I actually, at the time, I was able to work directly with Adobe to help them understand what those needs were. And it was interesting to watch little light bulbs go off as they started to understand the requirements for, you know, decimal points lining up in a column. So over time, new pieces were added to PDF, and it grew. It added, you know, support for securing things, adding a password to a file, guaranteeing color integrity, adding interactive elements, right? The ability to click on a link and go somewhere else, that was all added in. XML forms architecture, multimedia support. All of those things happened while it was still owned by Adobe. But in the sort of early years of 2003, 4, 5, there was this move to get PDF turned into an international standard. To take it out of the hands of a single vendor. I mean, certainly that was part of the consideration, but also to open it up to global needs. Not everybody, you know, writes from left to right. Some people needed right to left, top to bottom, you know, bottom to top. There were a lot of different needs if this was truly going to be a global standard. And so it transitioned and became ISO standard 32000-1. And the initial instantiation in 2008 then was updated in 2017. This is curated by the Technical Committee 171 as part of ISO. And there are Americans on that committee, but there are people from every country on that committee. And that's really important because PDF continues to expand. One of the things you may have noticed is that sometimes you get PDF files and they don't seem to be structured like other PDF files. And not everyone realizes that there are multiple PDF standards. They have a similar basis, but they're not all the same. So there's PDFX, PDFA, which you may know for archiving, PDFE for engineering, right? The home of CAD drawings, PDFVT, which was invented, effectively defined to allow caching of form template and insertion of live data on the fly. PDFUA for universal accessibility. Again, something that many of you may know, and PDF Raster, which is a subset of PDF 2.0. This one is hosted and really moderated by the PDF Association. Solimar is certainly a member of the PDF Association. And it is designed for storing and transporting multi-page raster image files. And again, very, very common need in our industry. So there's a lot that goes into PDF. But because there are so many kinds of PDF, you may be struggling with some of the things that you're trying to print. And certainly what that means is that your PDF may need to go on a diet. The PDF that comes to you comes from a lot of different places. It may have been through multiple transforms. It may have had all sorts of interesting experiences along the way. It may contain pieces that were designed by a qualified designer. It may have elements that were designed by what we used to call a forms designer. It may have pieces that were designed by, well, nobody at all. They were generated by a program. As a result of that, you can end up with PDF that has a lot of layers, kind of inconsistently specified fonts that aren't complete. You may see a lot of excess operands and X objects in the files because of having been through multiple transforms or being set up for accessibility or being set up for archive. And now you're being asked to print them, and that may cause you some challenges, or in fact, maybe not even print, but direct them out through, an email channel or other mobile channel. And you may discover that there's a lot of overhead because of that. And this is part of the talk track that we've had with ReadyPDF since I first fell in love with ReadyPDF. A lot of it came down to the ability to correct a lot of these problems. So we know that optimization makes a difference. And we know that one of the things that you can do is you can put a PDF that has been through multiple lives, and you can put it through a process that will optimize it and will create something that is more amenable to the processes that you have and that you need. So let's think about it this way. you need to take a file and you need to move it to an archive, say. But if it's too big, too heavy, too fat, processing it into your archive is going to take a lot of time. Maybe you need to send this file out through your email chains. Same thing. It's going to take a lot to get it through, because if it's too heavy, it's going to consume a lot of network bandwidth. So those are the things that we're really trying to address when we talk about optimization. So in this next segment, what you're going to hear is a conversation that I had with David Sweetnam, who runs the UK lab for Keypoint Intelligence and has been using ReadyPDF in the lab as part of the testing that they do for their clients, who are the major vendors. The Keypoint folks work with a lot of people, people that you may deal with regularly, some of the high-end vendors that we're all used to dealing with, as well as a lot of the office product vendors, MFP vendors. So they have a lot of history and a lot of expertise in the whole testing protocol. So with that as preamble, what I hope you're going to find is that this session with David will give you some insight into some of the things that Keypoint is doing and how they use optimized PDF and use ReadyPDF in their testing program. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for David. So I'm Pat McGrew, and I am here today with David Sweetnam. And David is my former colleague and good buddy from the UK. And David, what's your exact title? I know you run the UK lab for Keypoint Intelligence, but is there a more formal title we should use?
I'm the director of lab testing for Keypoint Intelligence. So wow. I deal with the European and a lot of the Japanese clients as well. And I work in partnership with my US counterpart.
Yeah, but usually when I'm talking to you, you're either just back from Japan or on your way to Japan. But COVID times, we're all doing things virtually, right?
Yeah, I know. I'm getting meso withdrawal symptoms at the moment. So
I know that feeling. Yeah, you feel like your wings are clipped. So, David, back at the end of last year, at the end of 2019, we were having a conversation about a new program you were putting in place to do RIP testing. And it's a service that Keypoint Intelligence offers to hardware vendors who have RIPs on their machines. And we concocted this idea that the Solimar product, ReadyPDF, might provide some value because it could optimize some PDF and you could start doing some, before and after kind of testing and give some additional value. So out of that, we learned a lot of things from the testing, but it brought to mind this idea that I think a lot of people aren't aware that there is all this vendor neutral testing that's going on, and a company like Keypoint Intelligence actually provides this really interesting service to the industry, because you work for, I think, all the vendors who sell hardware out there. It feels like you work for all of them. So I wondered if you could share, what is this testing that you do, and how do you assure that it's vendor neutral and that you can, and how does a vendor use that information to make their product better?
Sure. And we set up the production testing program back in, I think it's 2007. And just to get it going with a big bang, our first production test was actually running a big 10 million page test on the OSO Gemini engine when it first came out. Over the last 12 years, we've tested multiple generations of all the major light to mid-production vendors. And a few years ago, we picked up on the fact that these vendors had all really enhanced their machines significantly over the last 3-4 years, and they were getting to a point where our initial test program was starting to flatline. It wasn't showing the same level of differentiation that it had done when we were looking at machines 10 or 12 years ago. So what we wanted to do was reevaluate how we could reset the line in the sand around the testing program to start providing a bigger level of differentiation again, and really start stretching the machines against what they're now regarding as something that they regard as relatively easy to do. So part of this program is to set up testing that is going to be commonly associated with every engine. So our subscribers around the world can judge how a specific machine is doing a range of tests and compare it against other devices that may be also in their consideration. Because it's very difficult to judge how well one machine is going to perform against another machine when you're just looking at brochures or manuals and specifications, because machines in the field are invariably not doing what the brochure says anyway. So what we're trying to do is provide a level playing field against a wide range of different test scenarios that allow you to really see how good that machine is at doing a certain task compared to another.
So you can, you're running things that look like documents and things that look like forms and things that look like mail and things that look like, you know, all sorts of different things, so that you can get a sense of how a given machine performs for a given kind of product.
Exactly. So one of the big bits of feedback we got from the vendors when we had our last testing advisory meeting, which is where we get all the vendors in one room and we show them what our current test program is all about. We get their feedback on what they like, what they don't like, what they'd like to see enhanced upon. And one of the big areas of commonality in terms of feedback we received when we did the meeting about 3 years ago was they'd like to see us put a lot more effort and focus on how well the engines perform over a much more challenging range of media, and looking a lot more at how consistent they can retain the performance across these different challenging medias on a long production type test run. So what we built out as a result of that feedback was a whole suite of new test files and more challenging job tickets, so we could actually see how well these machines performed. So for example, we have a very high intensity menu, which is printed onto a textured paper stock. We have postcards that are being printed onto single side coated stocks. We have papers being printed on 300 GSM double-sided for business card printing. And for each of these different types of job ticket and media, we're actually assessing front to back registration, we're testing front page to page registration, and we have Fogra media wedges on the target files. So we can actually judge from the moment the test starts until the end of the test, an hour and a half later, how much of a drift there has been in those 42 Fogra wedge colors from the beginning to the end, assuming page one is where the client has looked at the quality, they're happy with the quality, they've signed off, and all they want to do is expect that at the end of the test run, the quality is going to look the same as it did at the beginning. So that's one of the big changes that we put in place for our new production service 2.0.
And your customers use all sorts of different RIPs, right? I mean, it's not that everybody's using the same RIP. You actually have to do all your testing with an eye towards the fact that somebody might be running Fiery, somebody might have a proprietary RIP. It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah. So again, it's vendor independent as far as the way we build the testing program. It's also vendor independent from a DFE perspective. So we deliberately make sure that we're not giving beneficial weighting to one vendor who may have a specific criteria that they're really good at, because we know that it will have every other vendor moaning, saying that, you know, why have you put that in there and given it such a lot of weight, because it's definitely benefiting vendor A versus other vendors, which is unfair. So a lot of time and effort goes into ensuring that we are truly neutral and truly vendor independent when we're designing these tests. And we go back to the vendors with our ideas and show them what we're developing to make sure we get them to give us any feedback they may have before we lock a program in stone, because we don't want to change programs after we tested 2 or 3 engines and suddenly realize that, you know, one of the 3 major vendors is really unhappy with what we put together and doesn't want to play with us anymore, because that would be a disaster for our test program. So it's really important that we get all the vendors on board with what we're doing, and they all want to contribute to the program, because it's through having every vendor having their machines tested by us is that where we get a really valuable information service that buyers and resellers and vendors can utilize to be able to compare machines side by side.
So PDF is a big part of this, because the files that you're actually testing are PDF.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if you're building files, and I would imagine sometimes vendors bring you files that they want to test.
All the files that we create are our own proprietary files. So we don't have the vendors giving us any files because, again, you never know what they've optimized in those files to make them look good. So we deliberately do not take any files that have been submitted by a vendor. They're all real-world documents that we have sourced ourselves or we have created ourselves.
So you know what they are, and that helps you ensure the neutrality of the test.
Absolutely. And we won't even give the vendors our test files so they can't optimize the RIPs before we actually go. So we will show them pretty much what we're going to do so they have a good understanding. For things like spot colors, we will let them know which spot colors we're going to be testing, but we will not give them access to our raw test files themselves.
Ah, that sounds like a good plan. So when you're looking at the testing, what are the things that are the most common hangups? You know, do you see you know, challenges with files as they come in, either in the testing? When you're in control of the files that you build, I think there's almost a kind of a bias to build them so they're going to work. But when you get a hold of files, like we sent you some files, or Solimar sent you some files to trial that had some known challenges, I think is a fair thing to say. Yeah. So how does that work in a testing protocol? But, you know, what does that help you understand about how the machine's going to perform?
Sure. So what we've done with Solimar is we've got a range of test files in an optimized format, and we have the same file without those optimizations applied. So what we do on the RIPs is we actually submit each of those files, and we record the time to complete the ripping process, and we also record the initial page out and the final page out of the tests to see what level of performance benefit you get from having the files optimized before you start printing. Some of the areas of optimization are things like spot color optimization, fonts, X objects. We even look at things like the time and efficiency of archiving the files after they've been printed. Things like the color spaces, how that can be optimized to make it easier for the RIP to process the whole job. And we have noticed in our testing so far that some of the lower powered RIPs on the entry-level light production machines have shown a bigger gap between the time to RIP on the optimized versus the non-optimized. So if anything, some of the benefits you get from the optimization process are even more important on the RIPs that don't have quite so much muscle power and really struggle with some of the poorly initially created PDF files.
There are a lot of machines out there that have been in place for 4, 5, 6, 7 years that are probably not on the most up-to-date RIP. So it sounds like if I'm a print service provider that's running an older RIP, that perhaps looking into PDF optimization could be a pretty good idea from a workflow perspective.
Sure. You know, some of the other things we'd like to do, you know, is potentially run the same files on the same engine, but using different DFEs. So if we have enough time and the vendor maybe gives us access to having the machine connected to 2 different DFE options, we could look at the difference in performance of those DFEs across the different Solimar test files, because that could then show again the benefit of maybe spending a bit more money on the RIP to give yourself more muscle power to actually get through some of these processing challenges and effectively allow you to keep the queue fully stacked and have the RIP fully utilized all the time.
You could kind of imagine a situation like right now you're doing a lot of, you know, light production, mid production. You could imagine a scenario where, especially in the wide format space, where it's really common to buy your RIP separately from your device. Yeah. That could be really valuable information to have in your hand.
Absolutely. And again, we do have a test program in the wide format signage space. So yeah, so, you know, enhancing this type of test service to look at the differences between an EFI or Wasatch or whatever other kind of wide format RIP is out there, but you might be testing against, could be really beneficial.
Really cool. So if I'm a print service provider and I'm out, you know, trying to decide what machines to buy, and I'm having conversations with my vendors, Are there specific questions I should ask about, the state of my DFE and the state of the testing? Is that information that they can either get from Keypoint Intelligence, or do they need to go to their vendor and have those conversations?
I think the most important thing is to obviously get a good understanding of what is the main purpose of what that machine is going to be doing in the print shop, because just to make a simple decision on which machine is better than another without knowing what the scenario it's going to be going into is simply wrong, in my opinion. So that's one of the reasons why we don't actually give an overall score to the machines we test, because a machine that might be extremely productive for printing low quality work for, say, an educational board could be something that is a really good fit based on one engine's criteria, but a machine that's spending its entire life producing high quality creatives where image quality is everything and a very low level of acceptability of color variance from the client, doesn't matter how fast you're printing. If you've got Del 3's 4, 5, 6 drift around on corporate colors you have to hit on the nose, you might as well not be printing at any ppm at all. So we deliberately do not give an overall score because the balance between productivity, ease of use, media flexibility, productivity is going to be very different from a client-to-client perspective.
So you're really the infrastructure service at Keypoint Intelligence. You're working directly with vendors to help them, I guess, tune their products, make their products as best they can be for the markets they want to serve.
Yeah, and we do a lot of pre-launch work with vendors, either at a beta level or sometimes even at an alpha level. I've been at vendors where I've been literally working on a machine and come in the next morning and there's been something cut off it and something else stuck on it. I want to see how well it worked, so it can be right down to that level. And one of the benefits that we provide them is that we have this database of information across the marketplace as a whole where everything is being treated the same way. So when they want to benchmark their product they're developing, they can really get a good understanding of how it's going to sit in the marketplace and where their potential strengths are going to be, and also where they may have some potential weaknesses that they could iron out the wrinkles of before it goes to market. So a lot of vendors really find that a useful service, and it doesn't matter how much internal QA, QC you do yourself. Our test program is quite broad in its reach, and it does push the machines quite hard. So we invariably come across issues that the vendors have not picked up before, and it gives them a really good opportunity to go to market with a cleaner product.
It's cool. David, it's been lovely. I've been happy to be involved as sort of the outside consultant in the middle of all this, and I've been delighted to have your partnership on the testing side. ReadyPDF is it has a place in my heart because I see so much just terrible PDF out in the marketplace. And it happens for kind of logical reasons. People transform files, they smash files together from all sorts of places and create production runs, which it does put a strain on the RIPs, and as a result of that, it puts a strain on the workflow. So it's really been a delight having the opportunity to have you out there testing, and I know the Solimar team appreciate it as well. I want to thank you for your time. In the world of COVID, where we're so many time zones apart, it's always sort of hard to get together with people, but this has been delightful. And what I'll tell anybody who is looking for more information, if you're one of our vendor partners who's looking for help, let me know, and I'll be happy to get you David's contact details. I'm sure someone in your team probably already knows him, but if not, I'll be happy to make that introduction. And look at the Keypoint Intelligence website. There's always a lot of really good information there as well. And hopefully we'll see you at a show at some point in the not too distant future. Absolutely. Where we can have a pint together.
And we look forward to working with Solimar as we continue expanding out our range of production and graphic art services. Because I think it's a really good relationship, and it's one where we can keep developing and expanding as we keep going into new areas. So I look forward to working with you guys, working for us.
Thanks so much, David.
Okay, thanks very much. Cheers.